Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Dominic Vieira, and I, along with my co-counsel, Mr. Angelo Fernandez, will prosecute Mr. Richard Grouper for the kidnapping and murder of Sarah Salmon. This case is about a window of opportunity, a window, sadly, through which a 14-year-old girl passed into the power of a treacherous acquaintance. A window, however, that may be redeemed from its tragic past to serve a just purpose by giving us a clear view into the events that led to Sarah's death and of the person responsible for it. We face a cruel and ugly fact. A young girl, innocent, has been abducted and murdered. Had she run away from home, and her death occurred through accident or negligence, we might have been more stoic, even resigned in the face of it. But you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, must feel the sorrow of her loss and anger at the injustice of her murder, as I did when this case first came before me. Our sadness and sense of injustice, however, though unavoidable, must not cloud our judgment and prevent us from discovering the cause of that grief and a remedy for the injustice. Deferring, however, to the power of these indignations, these senses of righteous indignation, I shall place before you and candidly reveal the chief weaknesses of our case. I shall then place before you and finish by outlining the facts that, although the defense may dispute their meaning, these facts will nonetheless establish the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So, what then is the chief weakness of the case for the prosecution? It is simply this, that we have no direct evidence connecting Richard Grouper with the murder of Sarah Salmon. And what does that mean? That means we have no video footage, no eyewitness testimony or free will confession by the defendant that will put us, in a sense, at the scene of the crime to witness Richard Grouper actually kidnapping and taking the life of this young girl. The evidence you shall hear from us, admittedly, is circumstantial, but no less indicative of guilt. Take, for example, if you follow the trail of cookie crumbs from a forbidden cupboard into the nursery, and there find a child sitting on an empty cookie jar with chocolate on his fingers and lips, and crumbs piled around him like the dust of a sawmill, do you let the child go just because you did not catch him in the act of stealing the jar or eating the cookies? I appeal to your candor, because circumstantial evidence can and should be used to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And on the strength of the evidence that you shall hear today, the prosecution will contend that Richard Grouper exploited a window of opportunity to build a relationship of trust with Sarah Salmon that he betrayed to the point of spilling her life's blood. So let us combine the admissions by the defense with the rest of the evidence to reconstruct the events that the prosecution contend will show the order of events from the time that we found Sarah's lifeless body back to the very sill of her bedroom window the night she left or was taken. So Mr. Grouper admits first, and will not dispute the facts, that Sarah Salmon is dead, that the police found her body abandoned beside a dirt track with signs of her hands having been bound and a gag having been used shortly before her death. And that on that dirt road, tire tracks were found next to her body that positively match the tread of the tires that are currently on Mr. Grouper's motorhome. Detective Dana Tarpin, who headed the investigation of these crimes, will tell you that hikers discovered Sarah's body near a dirt track 1/2 mile from Highway 202, and that a 7-Eleven gas station attendant found Mr. Grouper's abandoned motorhome on the lot of that gas station where she worked, within 1 mile of where Sarah's body was found. This attendant also saw, as Detective Tarpin will testify, and indeed spoke face-to-face with Mr. Grouper the night that Sarah disappeared at 3 o'clock in the morning. And later, this attendant picked out Mr. Grouper's photograph from a police photo pack. Detective Tarpin will further testify that blood spots, fingerprints, and DNA evidence were found not only in the abandoned motorhome, but in Mr. Grouper's own home. Mr. Grouper admits and stipulates that the DNA tests have identified the blood in his motorhome and in his actual home, positively identified them with the blood of Sarah Salmon and her DNA. Detective Tarpin will also attest to the fact that no trace of any person other than the victim, Sarah Salmon, and the accused, Richard Grouper, was left either in the motorhome that was used at the very least to transport Sarah's body from the place where she was killed to the place where her body was later found, and in the home of the accused, or in the victim's bedroom, no evidence whatsoever of any other persons besides the accused and the victim. Detective Tarpon will also state that none of Sarah's blood was found in her bedroom or in her home, or on the route between her home and Mr. Grouper's back door. Nevertheless, you will hear Richard Grouper testify that Sarah came bloody and beaten to his back door on the night she disappeared, seeking help. This is evidence that was given in testimony at a prior trial, and Mr. Grouper will not dispute this fact. Bear this question in mind when considering the rest of the evidence that you will hear. Would a young girl, a 14-year-old girl like Sarah, go in the middle of the night and possibly, if Mr. Grouper is to be believed, possibly under the control of a traumatic experience, would she go to the home of a stranger or a friend for help? The testimony of two witnesses, including Mr. Grouper, shall show that he established a relationship with Sarah through Sarah's fondness for Mr. Grouper's dog. This was, as it will be seen, a sort of catalyst for the relationship between the two of them, at least a nexus of connection. A diagram created by the detective, Dana Tarpon, will show that the general area in which the parties lived lay out the houses in this order: Sarah Salmon, the next door neighbor, we will discuss in a moment, and Mr. Grouper. In that order, those houses are laid out on the street. Finally, the prosecution and the defense shall present to you the very last words that Sarah Salmon communicated to anyone other than the person who killed her on the night she disappeared. Those words are as follows: "He's hitting me again. I'm going to Richard's." He's hitting me again. I'm going to Richard's. The defense will no doubt present the first of these two sentences as a motive for Sarah to flee her home and as a fact corroborating Mr. Grouper's testimony, given as he stipulates at a former trial, that Sarah came to his back door beaten and bloody, seeking help and shelter. But listen again, ladies and gentlemen, to that email. He's hitting me again. I'm going to Richard's. What about that second sentence, you may well ask? Sarah wrote that two-sentence email to her next-door neighbor, the classmate and close friend known as Kevin Fish, who is also known by his nom de plume, Fishface. Fishface lives in the house between Sarah's and Richard's. The prosecution can prove, and the defense cannot gainsay, the fact that on the night Sarah disappeared, she emailed Fishface, her next-door neighbor and close friend, that she was in trouble and that she was going not to her friend's house, as reasonable as that might be, but to another, more appealing safe haven, to another friend's house, that is, to Richard's. To the home of a man who had hidden the tarnished reputation he openly admits today in court behind the charms of his canine companion, and who, though he was nearly 3 times her age, this 14-year-old girl called by his first name. And it was at Richard's, as the defense admits, you will recall, that Sarah's innocent blood was found. On and in Richard's property alone. And there it lies as an indictment more powerful than any that can be lodged by the state. For this reason, at the close of this case, Mr. Fernandez will ask you to find, on the strength of these facts that we present, that Richard Grouper spun his web wide enough to trap the little girl who would fly through her window, for whatever reason may have prompted her to do so, not to safety, but to her death. Thank you.